Picture two identical grocery receipts. Same basket, bread, olive oil, coffee, a dozen eggs. One is stamped Valencia, the other is stamped Barcelona. Same country, same currency, same supermarket chain even. And yet the total at the bottom of the Barcelona receipt runs 15 to 20% higher, month after month, for the same items bought by the same kind of person. That gap is the entire subject of this episode. Not whether Spain is affordable, it clearly can be, but which version of Spain you're actually buying into when you pick a city. Start with geography, because scale explains more of this gap than most people assume. Valencia sits on Spain's east coast, roughly 350 kilometers south of Barcelona, and it's the country's third largest city, with about 800,000 residents inside the city limits. Barcelona is nearly double that population, Spain's second city, and the capital of Catalonia. Both are Mediterranean. Both have working beaches inside city limits. Both show up constantly on remote worker shortlists. The difference isn't sunshine or seafood. It's size, and size is what drives almost everything that follows. The broadest measure of that difference is Numbio's Cost of Living Index, a crowdsourced figure built from residents entering their own local prices. Valencia sits just above 50. Barcelona sits around 58 to 60, in the same range as Madrid. It's a useful compass, not a precise instrument, since the underlying data comes from ordinary people typing in what they paid last week. But as a directional signal, it's consistent with everything else in this episode. Convert that index into real euros, and the shape holds. A single person in Valencia spends an estimated 700 to 710 euros a month on groceries, transport, utilities, and going out, excluding rent. In Barcelona, the same lifestyle runs 800 to 830 euros. For a family of four, Valencia lands near 2,540 euros a month before rent. Barcelona lands between 2,880 and 2,980. On one side of this comparison, a household saves roughly 12 to 17% on daily life just by picking Valencia. On the other side, that saving comes attached to a smaller city, a smaller job market, and a smaller international footprint. Trade-offs we'll return to. Here's the number that actually decides who benefits from any of this. Average net salary. In Valencia, that figure sits around 1,740 euros a month. In Barcelona, it's closer to 2,070 euros, about 19% higher. So Barcelona costs more, but for someone earning locally, it also pays more, at least on paper. Whether that trade nets out in your favor depends entirely on where your income actually comes from. Keep that sentence in mind. We'll be testing it directly later with real numbers. Now to rent, where the two cities genuinely diverge. On one side, Barcelona, a studio in a non-touristy but still central-ish neighborhood like Poblenou or Sant Antoni runs 1,050 to 1,450 euros, climbing toward 1,885 euros for a two-bedroom in a mid-tier area, based on late 2025 and early 2026 asking price data from Idealista and Fotocasa. Prime example or Gracia push well past that ceiling. On the other side, Valencia's rental map escalates more gently, and it's worth walking through in order because the sequence itself tells the story. 15 minutes from the center by metro, in Benimaclet or Petreix, a one-bedroom starts around 550 to 900 euros. Move closer in, to the beachside district of Cabanile, and that same size flat runs 750 to 1,100 euros. Move into Rizafa, Valencia's walkable, cafe-heavy, expat-friendly answer to Gracia, and renovated stock starts near 1,400 euros, with older units from 1,100. 3 neighborhoods, 3 price bands, each one closing the gap with Barcelona a little further, until Rizafa's ceiling is roughly where Barcelona's floor begins. 300 to 500 euros. That's the realistic monthly rent gap between a central one-bedroom in Barcelona and an equivalent one in Rizafa or Cabanile, before groceries, before transport, before anything else enters the calculation. For a remote worker making that exact move, it's the single largest line item in this whole comparison. That gap isn't just market noise anymore. It's now partly written into law, and the two cities sit on opposite sides of that law. Under Spain's 2023 housing law, a city can be declared a zona tensionada, a stressed market, which caps how much landlords can raise rent between tenants. Barcelona and nearly all of Catalonia are fully inside that framework as of 2026. New contracts are pegged to a reference price index, and landlords holding 5 or more properties, classified as a grand tender, a large holder, face the tightest limits of all, while smaller landlords retain somewhat more flexibility when signing a new contract inside a stressed zone. Valencia isn't there. The Valencian community is, in official language, still actively evaluating stressed zone status for parts of Valencia City. Evaluating, not implementing. What Valencia has done instead is narrower, but genuinely new. As of late May 2026, tourist apartments can no longer exceed 2% of the housing stock in any single neighborhood, with additional limits on ground floor units and total bed counts. City Hall's stated goal is to stop short-term holiday flats from eating into long-term housing supply, the same pressure that's fueled years of protests in Barcelona. And as we'll see when we get to the visa numbers, that pressure isn't coming only from tourists. A second, quieter source of demand is baked directly into how Spain's residency system is priced. Whether a 2% cap meaningfully slows Valencia's rent growth is still an open question in mid-2026. There isn't enough post-implementation data to call it a win, and it's worth resisting the urge to treat a brand new policy as a settled outcome just because it made headlines. Buying tells a related but distinct story, because the two markets have taken different paths entirely. On one side, Barcelona's citywide average asking price sits around 5,000 to 5,200 euros per square meter as of spring 2026. Example alone averages over 6,300 euros per square meter, while the cheapest district, New Barris, still runs around 3,170. On the other side, Valencia's citywide average is lower in absolute terms, roughly 3,200 to 3,400 euros per square meter, but the growth rate should give any buyer pause rather than comfort. 75%. That's how much new build prices in Valencia have risen per square meter since 2022, driven by scarce land and a construction sector that hasn't kept pace with demand, pushing the average new construction price to 3,772 euros per square meter. Valencia is still cheaper to buy in than Barcelona today, by a wide margin, roughly 35 to 40% lower per square meter citywide. But it is not the undiscovered bargain it was 3 or 4 years ago. And for a buyer, the trend line matters as much as the sticker price. Financing conditions are national rather than city-specific. 20-year fixed mortgage rates for both cities hover in the 2.2 to 4% range as of 2026, so the buying decision comes down almost entirely to the purchase price itself, not to any difference in what a bank will charge you to borrow it. One caveat before moving on. In both cities, the price on a listing site and the price a deal actually closes at are two different numbers. Analysts estimate Barcelona listings run 5 to 8% above realistic closing prices. Valencia listings can run 18 to 22% above what properties actually sell for. If you're budgeting off a portal screenshot, you're probably budgeting too high, and Valencia punishes that mistake more than Barcelona does. Transport is where both cities are genuinely strong by European standards, just structured differently. On one side, Barcelona runs on TMB, metro, bus, and tram integrated under one ticketing system. A single ride costs 2.90 euros after a 2026 fare increase. A 10-trip T-Casual card costs 13 euros. The Real Value Pass, the T-Usual, gives unlimited 30-day travel for 22.80 euros, thanks to a national subsidy extended through 2026. On the other side, Valencia's Metro Valencia runs 6 metro lines and 4 tram lines on a card called Mobilis, with city buses operating separately under EMT. A single ride costs 2 euros, slightly cheaper than Barcelona, and a monthly pass averages around 30 euros. Beyond the fare sheet, there's a scale difference worth naming honestly. Barcelona's network is larger and denser, which matters if you're commuting across a genuinely big city. Valencia is compact enough that many residents in central neighborhoods simply walk or cycle instead of relying on transit at all. The historic center is walkable end to end in under 40 minutes, which isn't true of Barcelona at any comparable pace. The scale difference shows up most clearly in the sky. Barcelona's El Prat handled a record 57.5 million passengers in 2025 and connects to roughly 228 nonstop destinations across 69 countries. Genuinely global reach for anyone whose work or family requires frequent international travel. Valencia Airport, by contrast, handled 11.8 million passengers in 2025, also a record, but with closer to 100 direct destinations, weighted more heavily toward European and Spanish domestic routes. For remote workers who fly out for client meetings or fly home a few times a year, that's a real difference, not a lifestyle footnote. Climate plays a smaller role in this comparison than most travel content suggests, but it isn't nothing. Valencia averages close to 300 sunny days a year, with milder winters than Barcelona thanks to sitting further south, typically 2 to 3 degrees warmer in the coldest months. Barcelona's climate is still solidly Mediterranean, just with more winter rain and slightly cooler nights, especially in neighborhoods near the Calcerola Hills. For anyone choosing primarily on weather, the honest answer is that both cities qualify as genuinely mild by the standards of Northern Europe or North America, and the gap between them is smaller than the gap either one offers compared with where most remote workers are moving from in the first place. Utilities tell a smaller but consistent version of the same story. Basic utilities for an average apartment, electricity, water, waste, run around 140 to 145 euros a month in Valencia, with fast broadband internet adding roughly 33 to 34 euros. Barcelona's utility bills sit close behind, around 140 to 160 euros for a comparable flat, with internet pricing broadly similar across both cities. This is one of the few categories where the gap nearly closes, because national utility providers and telecom operators set prices with far less city-by-city variation than rent or property ever does. Dining out follows the same near-convergence pattern as utilities. An inexpensive restaurant meal runs about 15 euros in Valencia and roughly 14 to 16 euros in Barcelona, depending on the source consulted. Close enough that the difference barely registers against everything else in this episode. Where Barcelona pulls ahead is at the margins. A bottled water at a restaurant table can run 2.50 to 3 euros. Some establishments add a 1.50 to 3 euro bread and service charge that's legal but optional to decline. And tapas culture means small plates add up faster than a single Valencian menu del dia typically does. Moving in is where Barcelona's upfront costs separate most sharply from Valencia's, even before the first month's rent is due. Renters in Barcelona commonly report needing 2 to 3 months deposit, the current month's rent, and an agency fee in the 1,500 to 2,000 euro range, together pushing the cash needed just to sign a lease for an average flat toward 5,000 to 6,000 euros. Valencia's equivalent move-in costs run lower in rough proportion to its lower rents, though exact figures vary enough by landlord and agency that this is one area worth getting a written breakdown before committing to any specific apartment in either city. For anyone whose entire income depends on a stable internet connection, both cities clear that bar comfortably. Spain sits among the faster average broadband markets in the European Union, and co-working space has expanded in both cities well beyond what existed even 5 years ago. Barcelona's scene is larger and more corporate, clustered around Poblenou Tech District, while Valencia's is smaller but concentrated in Razafa, walking distance from most of the rental stock this episode has already covered. Neither city is a meaningful bottleneck for remote work. The constraint, again, comes back to budget rather than infrastructure. Healthcare works identically on paper in both cities because it's governed by one national system, not a city-level one. Spain's public healthcare system, the SNS, is funded through social security contributions. If you're employed by a Spanish company or registered as autonomo, self-employed, you and your dependents get access, and it's genuinely strong, free or near free at the point of care. The honest caveat, which shows up repeatedly in resident reviews for both cities: quality is high, but non-urgent specialist waits can stretch toward a year. Emergency and serious condition care moves fast, routine referrals do not. That trade-off belongs to the national system, not to either city specifically. Private clinics in both cities largely sidestep that wait, often booking specialist appointments within days rather than months, which is the main reason so many residents, not just visa holders, carry private coverage as a supplement even when they technically qualify for the public system. Most digital nomads and remote workers don't qualify for that public system access automatically because they aren't employed locally. Spain's visa rules require private health coverage instead, and for the digital nomad visa and non-lucrative visa specifically, that policy must have zero co-payments and match everything the public system would cover, which rules out ordinary travel insurance immediately. The actual cost of that private coverage climbs in a clear, ordered sequence worth stating in full. Under 40, a healthy applicant pays roughly 40 to 90 euros a month. Between 40 and 60, that climbs to somewhere around 100 to 150 euros. Past 60, insurers quote 150 to 350 euros a month. After one full year of legal residency, there's a cheaper middle path. The Convenio is special, a pay-in scheme granting public system access for 60 euros a month under 65, or 157 euros over 65. None of those healthcare costs or rules differ between Valencia and Barcelona. What differs is how far that monthly premium stretches against everything else in your budget. And that's exactly where the visa math comes in. The piece most videos about relocating to Spain skip entirely. Spain's digital nomad visa, launched under the 2022 Startup Act, is a single national program. It doesn't change based on which city you settle in. As of 2026, the minimum income requirement is 200% of Spain's minimum wage, raised to 1,221 euros a month under a January 2026 royal decree. 2,849 euros. That's the resulting monthly income floor for a single applicant in 2026, about 34,188 euros a year. Bring a partner and add roughly 1,068 euros a month. Each additional dependent adds about 356 euros. No more than 20% of that income can come from Spanish clients or companies, because the entire design of the visa is to bring outside money in, not to compete for local work. Here's the number worth sitting with. That 2,849 euro floor is 64% higher than Valencia's average local net salary of 1,740 euros and 38% higher than Barcelona's average of 2,070 euros. On one side of this system sits the local resident, earning a real Spanish salary in a real Spanish job. On the other side sits the visa holder, whose income is calibrated by design to sit meaningfully above that local median in either city. Both groups shop at the same supermarket and rent from the same landlords. Their actual purchasing power inside that market is not remotely equal. Neither city set out to build that gap deliberately. It's a byproduct of a national visa policy interacting with two different local labor markets. But the effect lands identically in both places. Newcomers with outside income can outbid residents for the same limited housing stock without ever competing for the same jobs. On tax, digital nomad visa holders can opt into the Beckham Law regime, a flat 24% income tax rate on earnings up to 600,000 euros a year, instead of Spain's standard progressive scale, which climbs toward 47%. For a mid to high earner, that's a substantial saving, though it requires active election with the tax authority and specific eligibility conditions. It isn't automatic just because you hold the visa. The digital nomad visa isn't the only door into Spain, and it's worth naming the other main one so the comparison isn't lopsided. The non-lucrative visa, aimed at retirees and anyone living on passive income rather than active work, requires roughly 2,400 euros a month for a single applicant, plus about 600 euros for each additional family member, noticeably lower than the digital nomad visa's 2,849 euro floor. The trade-off is total. Non-lucrative visa holders cannot work at all, remotely or otherwise, for any employer anywhere, which makes it a fundamentally different kind of move than the remote income scenario this episode is built around. Families weighing either visa also weigh schooling, and here the two cities land closer together than rent might suggest. International primary school tuition in Valencia averages around 8,900 euros a year, typically ranging from 7,500 to 12,000. In Barcelona, equivalent international primary tuition generally starts around 9,000 euros and can run past 15,000 at premium campuses, before registration and enrollment fees that add another 1,000 to 5,000 euros in the first year at either city. Schooling costs scale with school choice more than with city choice. A family willing to use mid-range bilingual schools in either city spends meaningfully less than one set on a premium international campus in either city. None of this accounts for the bureaucratic cost of actually landing the visa in the first place. The NIE foreigner identification number, apostille documents, and a Spanish bank account are required in both cities, and the process runs through the same national immigration framework either way. Neither city offers a meaningfully faster or slower path through that paperwork. The difference between Valencia and Barcelona shows up in monthly cost of living, not in how long the residency process itself takes. Now run the actual numbers for someone sitting right at that visa minimum, 2,849 euros a month in each city. In Barcelona, rent for a central one-bedroom around 1,300 euros, living costs excluding rent around 820 euros, private health insurance around 70 euros. That's roughly 2,190 euros committed, leaving about 660 euros a month of genuine discretionary room. In Valencia, same income, rent for an equivalent central one-bedroom around 1,000 euros, living costs around 708 euros, insurance around 70 euros. That's about 1,778 euros committed, leaving roughly 1,070 euros a month free. Nearly 60% more breathing room than the identical income earner gets in Barcelona. That's the clearest, most concrete answer to this episode's opening question. For someone whose income is fixed and comes from outside Spain, the exact profile the digital nomad visa targets, Valencia isn't marginally cheaper than Barcelona. It's the difference between a tight, comfortable life and a genuinely spacious one on the same paycheck. It's worth stress testing that comparison at a higher income too, since not every visa holder sits exactly at the minimum. Someone earning 4,000 euros a month, comfortably above the digital nomad visa floor, still saves roughly the same 300 to 500 euros in rent moving from Barcelona to Valencia, but that saving now represents a smaller share of a larger income, closer to 8 to 12% of total earnings, rather than the 15 to 18% it represents for someone sitting right at the visa minimum. The lower your income sits relative to the visa floor, the more Valencia's price advantage actually shapes your day-to-day life. The higher above it you sit, the more the choice becomes about lifestyle and city scale rather than arithmetic. Run the same visa minimum math for a family instead of a single applicant, and the gap widens rather than narrows. A couple with one child on the digital nomad visa needs roughly 4,273 euros a month to qualify, the 2,849 euro base, plus the additions for a spouse and one dependent. In Barcelona, a three-bedroom outside the most central districts runs roughly 1,650 to 2,200 euros, on top of family living costs near 2,880 euros before rent. A combination that leaves a comparatively thin margin against that income floor. In Valencia, an equivalent three-bedroom outside the center runs closer to 1,100 to 1,700 euros, against family living costs near 2,540 euros before rent, leaving noticeably more room against the same qualifying income. Add the schooling costs from a moment ago on top of either budget, and Barcelona's version of this family scenario gets considerably tighter than Valencia's, even before accounting for the larger upfront move-in cost Barcelona typically demands. But flip the lens to someone who isn't on a visa minimum remote income, someone earning the local average salary, working for a Spanish company, and the picture changes entirely. That person in Barcelona, earning 2,070 euros, is already below the digital nomad visa threshold of 2,849 euros. The same person in Valencia, earning 1,740 euros, is even further below it. This is the two-economy pattern this series has flagged in earlier episodes, and Spain fits it too, just with a wealthier baseline than the Balkan cities covered before. One price level for residents earning inside the local labor market, and a functionally different, higher price level for remote income arrivals whose visa is calibrated above the local median by design. For Spanish residents earning locally, that's not an abstract statistic, it's lived pressure. Resident comments on both cities describe rent that has tripled in recent years for some renters, and property analysts note a growing number of Barcelona and Valencia locals being priced out of the neighborhoods they grew up in, a dynamic the 2023 housing law was explicitly written to slow down. On quality of life rankings, Valencia does something unusual for a mid-sized Mediterranean city. On one composite global index, it lands around 28th worldwide, ahead of Barcelona, with the gap driven mainly by lower pollution readings and shorter average commutes. Take that ranking as one data point among several rather than a verdict. These composite indices weight categories like climate and purchasing power in ways that don't map onto everyone's priorities the same way, and a single-digit shift in ranking often reflects survey noise as much as real difference. One risk factor belongs in this comparison and rarely makes it into cost breakdowns. In October 2024, the Dana storm system caused catastrophic flooding across towns south of Valencia City, killing over 200 people and triggering a still ongoing infrastructure and insurance reckoning across the wider region. The city center itself was largely spared the worst flooding, but the event reshaped how residents and insurers think about flood risk in low-lying parts of the Valencian community, and it's worth researching neighborhood by neighborhood rather than assuming the city-level statistics in this episode fully capture it. Barcelona carries its own version of that same honest caveat, just political rather than climatic. Housing pressure here isn't only a pricing story. The city has seen repeated anti-tourism protests since 2024, driven by residents who link short-term rentals and rising visitor numbers directly to the rent increases documented earlier in this episode. City Hall has moved to eliminate short-term tourist apartment licenses entirely by the end of 2028, a far more aggressive step than Valencia's 2% neighborhood cap, and a sign of how much further the political pressure has built in Barcelona than in Valencia. So who does Barcelona actually make sense for at 2026 prices? Realistically, people whose income scales with the city's size, corporate relocations with a Barcelona-adjusted salary, tech workers hired directly by Catalan companies, or remote earners well above the digital nomad minimum who want a bigger international airport, deeper startup and creative scenes, and a city that carries genuine second-tier European capital weight. Valencia makes the clearest sense for the opposite profile. Fixed remote income near or at the visa minimum, a preference for a walkable, human-scaled city over a sprawling metropolitan one, and a willingness to trade some job market depth and flight connectivity for a rent bill that's routinely 300 to 500 euros lower for comparable space. Retirees on the non-lucrative visa sit somewhere in between. Since that visa forbids working entirely, Barcelona's deeper job market offers them nothing they're allowed to use, which tilts the practical case further toward Valencia's lower cost base and gentler pace unless the draw is specifically Barcelona's cultural scale rather than employment opportunity. One honest note before closing. Every figure in this episode comes from sources that update constantly and don't always agree with each other by more than a few percentage points. Numbeo is crowdsourced from residents. Idealista and Photocasa reflect asking prices, not closed sales. Government income thresholds get revised annually alongside the minimum wage. Treat everything here as a well-sourced snapshot of mid-2026, not a fixed law of nature. Go back to those two receipts from the opening. Same basket, same currency, 15 to 20% apart. By now you know most of what sits behind that gap. Rent, property trends, transport structure, a healthcare system that doesn't discriminate by city, and a visa system that quietly does. What you don't get from this episode is which receipt you should be holding. Is the extra 300 to 500 euros a month in Barcelona buying you a bigger life, or just a bigger price tag on the same one? And in Valencia, is today's lower number a lasting advantage, or a discount that's already 3 years into disappearing? Whichever receipt you end up holding, it's worth checking the total again in a year, because at the rate both cities are moving, neither number is standing still.